Khalid al-Mansour's world was a symphony of sensations. Where others relied on sight, he had built his reality from the texture of whispered breezes, the melody of laughter, and the warm press of sunlight on his skin. Born blind, Khalid had never known the flash of a sunset or the shimmer of moonlight reflected on water. Yet he carried a presence, an aura of unshakable confidence that drew people to him as if he could see more than most. His life, by any standard, was extraordinary. As the heir to a modest shipping business, he had transformed his family's humble beginnings into a sprawling empire. Khalid's ventures spanned luxury hotels, cutting-edge tech, and philanthropic initiatives that garnered him admiration not just for his success, but for his generosity. He had built it all with an unwavering determination to prove that his blindness was not a limitation but a different way of experiencing the world. People often asked him how he managed. They marveled at his sharp business instincts, the way he negotiated deals without ever seeing the fine print, or how he seemed to know when someone's words didn't match their intent. Khalid would smile in response, brushing aside the praise with a gracious humility. What he rarely admitted was that his ability to read people went far beyond instinct. It came from years of training himself to tune into the subtleties others ignored. He noticed the hesitation in a voice, the slight shift in weight before a handshake, or the rhythm of a breath that hinted at hesitation or resolve. But even with his accomplishments, Khalid was not without longing. It was a quiet yearning, buried beneath layers of acceptance and resolve, that surfaced in the rarest moments. In the private corners of his mind, he sometimes wondered what it would be like to see. Not the boardrooms he commanded or the sprawling vistas his properties boasted, but the people he loved. What did his mother's face look like when she smiled? How did his father's weathered hands reflect the years of labor that built their legacy? And most of all, how did Layla look when she laughed? Layla was his anchor. She had entered his life 5 years earlier during a fundraiser for one of his charities. Khalid remembered her voice before anything else, steady, thoughtful, and with a lilt that seemed to turn even mundane words into poetry. She had approached him with a question about his work, and from that moment, her curiosity and warmth drew him in. Their connection had deepened over time, built on conversations that stretched late into the night and shared silences that spoke volumes. Where others tiptoed around his blindness, Layla embraced it with an effortless grace that disarmed him. She never hesitated to describe things he couldn't see, from the way her coffee swirled in the morning light to the sparkle of stars on a clear desert night. Her words painted pictures more vivid than any canvas, and through her, Khalid felt he had seen the world. Their love grew slowly, rooted in trust and understanding. For Khalid, Layla was a revelation, a woman who saw him, not as a blind man or a wealthy businessman, but simply as himself. For Layla, Khalid represented a kind of strength and vulnerability she had never encountered before. He was a man who carried his blindness with dignity, refusing to let it define him, yet unafraid to acknowledge the challenges it brought. The proposal had been as thoughtful as Khalid himself. One quiet evening in his villa, the scent of blooming jasmine drifting in through open windows, he had taken her hand. "Layla," he began, his voice steady but soft, "you've been my guide in ways I never imagined. You've shown me not just the world but myself. Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you how much that means to me?" Her laughter, light and tearful, had been her answer, followed by an unequivocal yes. They had begun planning their wedding almost immediately, a union that would bring their families and friends together in celebration. As the days to the wedding counted down, Khalid found himself reflecting on the life he had built. His villa, with its sweeping terraces and cascading fountains, was filled with the sounds of preparation. Relatives arriving, vendors bustling, and laughter echoing through the halls. He felt the stirrings of anticipation, but also an inexplicable unease. Late at night, when the world quieted, Khalid would sit in his study, running his fingers over objects that held meaning. The embossed leather of his favorite book, the smooth ridges of a carved chess piece his father had given him, and a collection of braille notes Layla had written for him over the years. He held one of them now, the words pressing into his fingertips as if her voice were whispering them directly into his soul. "You are my light, even in the darkest of nights." Her words brought a lump to his throat, but they also stirred that quiet yearning. It wasn't regret or dissatisfaction, but a profound wish, one that grew stronger with each passing day. Khaled didn't need sight to love Layla. He had fallen for her voice, her mind, and the way her presence filled his life with warmth. Yet, he couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to see her. He had never spoken of this longing, not even to Layla. To him, it felt selfish, as if admitting it would diminish the love they had built. But the thought lingered, coloring his moments of solitude with an ache he couldn't quite shake. On one such evening, Layla found him in his study, her footsteps soft but sure. "You're quiet," she said, her voice tinged with curiosity. "I was just thinking," he replied, turning his head toward her. "About us. About the future." She sat beside him, her hand finding his. "Good things, I hope?" "Always," he said with a smile, though it didn't quite reach his voice. Layla seemed to sense his mood but didn't press him. She trusted him, as he trusted her, and for now, that was enough. Khaled squeezed her hand, grounding himself in the connection that had carried them this far. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing with certainty. Layla was his heart, his compass, and the one person who could make even his darkest days feel like light. The quiet longing that Khaled carried had become a silent companion in the days leading up to the wedding. It lingered in the back of his mind, coloring his moments of reflection with bittersweet thoughts. He loved Layla with a certainty that went beyond anything he had ever known. But the question of what it would mean to see her, to truly see her, had begun to take root in his soul. It was a thought he had kept to himself, not out of shame but out of fear that voicing it might somehow disrupt the delicate balance of their relationship. One evening, as the villa buzzed with preparations, Khaled received an unexpected call from Dr. Ahmed, a close friend and renowned ophthalmologist. Ahmed had been working on a revolutionary procedure to restore sight in patients who had been blind from birth, and though Khaled had always admired Ahmed's work, he had never considered himself a candidate. He had made peace with his blindness long ago, choosing to focus on the richness of the world he could experience rather than lamenting the one he couldn't. Ahmed, however, was persistent. "Khaled, I've read the results from our latest trials, and I believe you're an ideal candidate. The procedure is not without risks, but the potential is extraordinary. You could see, my friend." The words hung in the air like a challenge, tempting Khaled in a way he hadn't anticipated. For a moment, he considered dismissing the idea outright, as he had done with similar suggestions in the past. But then, Layla's voice drifted into his thoughts, her laughter painting images in his mind that he couldn't quite grasp. He thought of her eyes, her smile, things he could only imagine, and a flicker of possibility ignited within him. He asked for time to think, though in his heart, he already knew his decision. That night, as he lay in bed, his fingers brushed over one of Layla's braille notes, a simple message that read, "You've taught me to see the world in a new way." It was her faith in him, her belief that he could overcome any challenge, that finally pushed him to take the leap. The following week, Khaled informed Layla of his decision. Her reaction was a mixture of surprise and hope. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "I don't want you to feel like you have to do this for me." "I'm not," Khaled assured her, taking her hands in his. "This is something I need to do for myself. But I would be lying if I said the thought of seeing you isn't part of what drives me." Her silence was brief but thoughtful. Then, she leaned in and kissed him gently on the forehead. "Whatever happens, Khaled, I'm here. Always." The day of the surgery arrived sooner than Khaled expected. As he lay on the operating table, surrounded by a team of specialists and the hum of machines, a sense of calm washed over him. This was a step into the unknown, but it was one he was willing to take. He thought of his parents, their unwavering support, and of Layla, who had taught him that love was not bound by limitations. The procedure was long and meticulous, but when it was over, Ahmed's voice broke through the haze of anesthesia. "It went perfectly, Khaled. We'll know more in the coming days, but everything looks promising." The next few days were a blur of recovery and anticipation. Khaled's eyes, shielded by bandages, remained closed, but the possibility of what lay ahead filled him with a nervous energy he hadn't felt in years. When the day finally came to remove the bandages, Ahmed's voice was calm but firm. "Take it slow. This will be overwhelming at first." As the layers of gauze were peeled away, Khaled opened his eyes to a world of light and shadow. It wasn't immediate clarity, but it was something, a shimmering canvas of shapes and colors that took his breath away. He blinked rapidly, his eyes adjusting to the unfamiliar sensations, and as the room slowly came into focus, he saw Ahmed's face, lined with years of wisdom and compassion. "Khaled?" Ahmed asked gently. I can see," Khaled whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "Not perfectly, but I can see." The next days were filled with wonder and disorientation. Khaled marveled at the way sunlight poured through windows, casting patterns on the walls. He studied his own hands, tracing the lines of his palms and marveling at how their texture matched the images now imprinted in his mind. The world was a masterpiece of detail and vibrancy, and he felt like a child discovering it for the first time. But amidst the joy, there was apprehension. Khaled thought often of Layla, the woman he had known through touch, sound, and scent. What would it mean to see her? Would the image in his mind align with the reality before him? He found himself grappling with fears he hadn't anticipated. What if his newfound sight changed how he felt? What if it changed how she saw him? Layla, ever perceptive, gave him space to adjust. She didn't push or rush him, trusting that he would come to her when he was ready. Khaled appreciated her patience, though it only deepened the pressure he placed on himself. He wanted their first meeting in this new reality to be perfect, but perfection felt elusive in a world he was only beginning to understand. One evening, as Khaled sat alone on the terrace of his villa, the city lights twinkling like stars in the distance, he tried to reconcile his emotions. He thought of the love they had built, a love that had endured challenges far greater than this. Layla was his heart, his guide, the person who had taught him to see beauty in every corner of his life. He knew that no matter what, his feelings for her would remain unchanged. And yet, as their first meeting drew closer, Khaled couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown. The woman he had loved without sight was about to become the first person he would truly see. It was a thought that filled him with equal parts joy and trepidation, setting the stage for a moment that would change both of their lives forever. The days following Khaled's recovery were a whirlwind of sensations and emotions, but as the wedding approached, his thoughts grew singularly focused on one moment: seeing Layla. He had rehearsed it in his mind countless times, the way he would look into her eyes, the moment their gazes would meet, and the unspoken bond that would pass between them. It felt like the culmination of everything they had built together, a physical manifestation of the love they had shared without ever needing sight. But beneath his excitement lingered an unease he couldn't shake. The world he had begun to see was vivid and overwhelming, sometimes startling in its rawness. Colors were brighter than he had imagined, faces more intricate, expressions more telling. It made him wonder, what if Layla wasn't what he had pictured? And if she wasn't, would it change anything? He hated himself for even entertaining the thought, but it clung to the edges of his mind like an unwelcome guest. The morning of the wedding was filled with quiet anticipation. Khaled dressed slowly, his fingers grazing the fine fabric of his tailored suit. He listened to the hum of activity around him, voices laughing, feet shuffling, the soft clink of glasses being arranged. It was a familiar kind of chaos, comforting in its routine, but Khaled felt like he was standing on the edge of an unfamiliar precipice. His best man, Omar, approached him with a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Nervous?" he asked, his tone light but probing. Khaled nodded. "More than I thought I'd be." Omar chuckled. "That's normal. Just wait until you see Layla. Well, you'll understand when the moment comes." Khaled smiled faintly, but his heart tightened. He wanted to believe Omar's words would ease his tension, but they only magnified it. Seeing Layla would be the moment he had dreamed of, and yet it was the moment he feared the most. The ceremony was held in the grand courtyard of his villa, beneath an archway of jasmine and white roses. As Khaled stood waiting, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, he felt the weight of the crowd's attention, their whispers and murmurs filling the air. But all of it faded when the music began, a soft, lilting melody that signaled Layla's arrival. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. They were deliberate, unhurried, a sound he had memorized over years of shared moments. And then she appeared. Khaled froze. For a moment, the world around him seemed to blur, and all he could focus on was the woman standing at the end of the aisle. She was radiant, her dress shimmering in the sunlight, her hair cascading in dark waves over her shoulders. Her face was beautiful, but not in the way he had imagined. It was softer, less defined by the features he had constructed in his mind. There was an unfamiliarity to her that unsettled him, a gap between the Layla he knew and the Layla he saw. His hesitation was brief but noticeable. A flicker of confusion crossed Layla's face as she approached, her steps faltering slightly. When she stood before him, her eyes searched his, looking for the recognition she had expected. Khaled struggled to find his words, his silence stretching longer than it should have. "You're beautiful," he finally said, but his voice lacked the conviction he had intended. Layla's smile wavered, her eyes clouding with something Khaled couldn't quite decipher. "Thank you," she replied softly, her tone cautious. The ceremony continued, but an undercurrent of tension lingered. Khaled tried to push past his initial reaction, focusing on the vows they had written together, the promises they had made long before this day. Yet, he couldn't shake the dissonance he felt, the way his mind wrestled with the unfamiliar reality of Layla's appearance. He hated himself for it, for letting something so superficial cloud the moment that should have been one of pure joy. After the ceremony, the guests moved to the reception area, leaving Khaled and Layla alone for a moment. She turned to him, her expression a mix of concern and hurt. "Khaled, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice steady but strained. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's overwhelming," he admitted. "Seeing everything, seeing you. It's not what I expected." Layla's brows furrowed, and she took a step back. "Not what you expected? What does that mean?" "I don't know," he said, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's just different. I've loved you for so long without seeing you, and now that I can, it's disappointing," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "No," he said quickly, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. "It's not that. It's just, I need time to process this. It's a lot." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she shook her head. "I've spent years loving you, Khaled, and I never needed to see you to know who you are. I thought you felt the same, but now, I don't know." Her words cut deep, and Khaled felt the weight of his hesitation pressing down on him. "Layla, I love you. That hasn't changed," he said desperately. "But something has," she replied, her voice breaking, "and I can't pretend I don't feel it." She turned and walked away, leaving Khaled standing alone in the quiet courtyard. He felt a wave of shame and regret, his heart aching with the realization of how his reaction had hurt her. The woman he loved, the woman who had been his light in the darkness, was now a stranger in his sighted world, a truth that shook him to his core. Khaled sank onto a nearby bench, his mind racing. He thought of all the moments they had shared, the connection that had been unshakable until now. He knew he had to find a way to bridge the gap between the Layla he had loved in darkness and the Layla he now saw in the light. For the first time, he realized that the struggle wasn't about her but about himself, his fears, his expectations, and his ability to embrace the reality before him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Khaled made a silent vow. He wouldn't let his insecurities destroy what they had built. He would fight for Layla, for their love, and for the chance to see her not just with his eyes, but with the heart that had always known her beauty. The silence between Khaled and Layla in the days following the wedding ceremony was almost unbearable. He could still feel the weight of her words, the pain in her voice, and the distance she had created when she walked away from him in the courtyard. She stayed in her family's villa, only a short drive away, but to Khaled, it felt as though she had taken her warmth and light to an unreachable distance. Khaled spent his days in solitude, wandering the halls of his own home. The sights that had once filled him with wonder now felt hollow. He found himself retreating to the familiar comfort of textures and sounds, the The soft brush of his fingers over braille notes, the distant hum of the city, the rhythm of his own footsteps on marble floors. His sight had given him so much, but it had also exposed parts of himself he wasn't proud of, his hesitation, his unspoken fears, and the ways in which his mind had betrayed the love he thought was unshakable. Omar visited one evening, uninvited but welcome. Khaled was sitting on the terrace, staring at the city lights that twinkled like stars. Omar approached with a quiet understanding, settling into the chair beside him. "You've been avoiding everyone," Omar said, breaking the silence. "But mostly, you've been avoiding her." Khaled sighed. "I don't know how to face her, Omar. I hurt her. I didn't mean to, but I did." "Because you hesitated?" Omar asked. "Because I let my insecurities get in the way," Khaled admitted. "I let myself believe that what I imagined mattered more than what was real. And when reality didn't match the picture in my mind, I faltered." Omar leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. "Do you love her, Khaled?" "With everything I have," Khaled replied without hesitation. "That's the part that hasn't changed. That will never change." "Then show her," Omar said simply. "Love isn't about perfection or expectations. It's about what you do, even after you've stumbled." Khaled spent the night reflecting on Omar's words. He thought back to the countless moments that had defined his relationship with Layla, not the grand gestures, but the small, quiet acts of love. The way she had read to him on stormy nights, her voice soothing his restless thoughts. The way she had held his hand during his father's funeral, her presence grounding him in his grief. The way she had laughed when he burned their dinner during one of his rare attempts at cooking, turning what could have been a disaster into a cherished memory. By morning, Khaled knew what he had to do. He called Layla's mother first, explaining his plan. Her voice, warm and encouraging, was all the reassurance he needed. Then he spent the day preparing, pouring his heart into every detail. When evening came, he stood in the garden of Layla's family's villa, surrounded by soft lights and the scent of jasmine that she loved so much. Layla stepped outside, her hesitation evident. She looked at Khaled, her expression guarded, but her eyes still held the kindness he had always known. He took a step toward her, his heart pounding, and extended his hand. "Layla," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've spent the past few days thinking about the ways I failed you. I let my fears and insecurities cloud a moment that should have been about nothing but love. And for that, I am sorry." She didn't reply immediately, her gaze searching his face. "You hurt me, Khaled," she said finally. "Not because you hesitated, but because it felt like you didn't see me." "Not really." "I know," he said softly. "And you're right. I let myself get lost in what I thought things should be instead of embracing what they are. But Layla, I see you now, not just with my eyes, but with my heart, the way I always have. And what I see is more beautiful than anything I could have imagined." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she held his gaze. "And how do I know that this isn't just words, Khaled? That you won't falter again?" He smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Because I've learned that love isn't about getting it right the first time. It's about choosing to fight for what matters, even when you've made mistakes." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. It was covered in textured leather, and as he handed it to her, she saw that it was filled with braille. She ran her fingers over the first page, her breath catching as she recognized the words, "Layla, you are my light, my compass, my heart. In darkness or in light, I will always choose you." Khaled continued, his voice steady. "I wrote this for you, with my own hands, because even though I can see now, it was through touch, sound, and the essence of who you are that I fell in love with you. That hasn't changed, and it never will." Layla closed the notebook, holding it to her chest as tears slipped down her cheeks. She stepped closer, her hands finding his. "I've always believed in you, Khaled," she whispered. "I just needed to know you still believed in us." "I do," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "More than ever." Their embrace was quiet, but it spoke volumes. In that moment, the weight of their shared pain and uncertainty lifted, replaced by the unshakable foundation they had built together. Khaled knew that their journey would not be without challenges, but he also knew that they were stronger for having faced this one. The wedding celebration that followed a few days later was more intimate, but no less meaningful. Under the same archway of jasmine and roses, Khaled and Layla renewed their vows. This time, there was no hesitation, no faltering, only the steady, unwavering promise of a love that had weathered the storm and emerged brighter for it. As Khaled looked into Layla's eyes, he saw not just the woman before him, but the essence of everything she had always been. He realized then that his sight was a gift, but it was his heart that had truly seen her all along. And for the first time, both darkness and light existed in perfect harmony.
The early morning sun filtered through the towering glass windows of the Auraman estate, casting golden light over the sprawling gardens. Khaled Auraman sat in the study, surrounded by silence that was rare for a man of his stature. The smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air, untouched on the tray before him. Today marked his 10th wedding anniversary with Layla, the woman who had transformed his world from a cold empire of business deals into something warmer, richer. Layla had a way of turning even the grandest of their palaces into a home, her laugh filling the halls and her charitable endeavors weaving connections with people far outside their glittering circles. Khaled had built an empire of oil and tech, but Layla had built him. He ran his fingers through his neatly trimmed beard and smiled, thinking of her reaction to the gift he had planned. The necklace had come to him by chance, or so it seemed. A jeweler from Istanbul had shown him the sapphire, a rare stone that shimmered with an almost unearthly depth. Its size and clarity would make it the centerpiece of any collection, but the story behind it intrigued Khaled even more. This belonged to Queen Alima of the Desert Kingdoms, the jeweler had said. Legend says it was a gift from her treacherous lover, who sought to keep her bound to him for eternity. But it is cursed. Misfortune follows the wearer. Khaled had chuckled. A curse? Surely, in this day and age, we don't believe such things. The jeweler had only smiled, his wizened face unmoved. Curses don't care whether you believe in them, sir. Despite the warning, Khaled had purchased the necklace without hesitation. It was perfect for Layla, unique, steeped in history, and undeniably beautiful. The curse was a fanciful touch, something they could laugh about later over champagne. Tonight, during the gala at their Dubai mansion, he would give it to her. The evening arrived with all the splendor Khaled and Layla's life demanded. Their home shimmered with lights, chandeliers illuminating vaulted ceilings as guests in glittering attire mingled. The scent of jasmine and oud lingered in the air, and the soft hum of classical music completed the opulence. Layla descended the grand staircase like a vision, her gown flowing like liquid silver, her dark hair swept elegantly to one side. She greeted Khaled with her usual warmth, placing a hand on his arm. You outdo yourself every year, she teased. How will you top this next time? Khaled grinned, taking a velvet box from his pocket. Perhaps this will keep me in your good graces until then. Her eyes widened as she opened the box to reveal the sapphire necklace. The gemstone glowed like a sliver of midnight sky, encased in delicate strands of platinum. Layla gasped, her fingers tracing the cool surface of the stone. It's exquisite, she whispered. But it must have cost a fortune. Nothing could cost too much for you, Khaled replied, clasping the necklace around her neck. Besides, it comes with a story. The sapphire belonged to a queen, and apparently it's cursed. Layla laughed, a bright, melodious sound that turned heads in the room. Then I suppose I'll have to be careful, she said, kissing him lightly on the cheek. The evening continued, filled with speeches, laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses. Layla's necklace drew admiration from every corner of the room. She carried herself with her usual grace, dazzling her guests as she moved through the crowd. But Khaled couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. During his speech, as he stood beside Layla near the grand chandelier, a sudden groan echoed through the hall. The chandelier swayed ominously, its crystals casting fractured light as it creaked under its weight. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Khaled instinctively pulled Layla closer to him. Just the air conditioning, someone said nervously, and the incident was quickly forgotten. But Khaled couldn't ignore the tightness in his chest. He held Layla's hand for the rest of the evening, refusing to let her out of his sight. When the last of the guests had left and the mansion finally fell quiet, Layla teased him about his worry. "You're acting like I've already been struck down by this supposed curse," she said, brushing her fingers over the sapphire. "Maybe it's the thought of losing you that makes me uneasy," Khalid admitted. He kissed her forehead. "Go to bed, my love. I'll join you soon." Layla smiled and disappeared into their bedroom, her laughter trailing softly behind her. Khalid stayed behind for a moment, staring at the remnants of the evening, the empty glasses, the scattered rose petals. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, that the chandelier had been a coincidence, and the jeweler's warning nothing more than an old man's superstition. But a cold weight settled in his chest that even the warmth of his home couldn't displace. The next morning, Khalid awoke to the sound of frantic voices outside his room. The sunlight felt harsh, unnatural, as if it didn't belong in a house suddenly gripped by fear. He hurried to their bedroom, his pulse quickening with every step. The sight that greeted him froze him in place. Layla lay still on their bed, the sapphire glinting faintly against her pale skin. Her face was serene, almost as if she were sleeping, but Khalid knew before anyone spoke that she was gone. "No," he whispered, rushing to her side. He touched her hand, it was cold. The doctors arrived quickly, but their faces were grave. "There's no explanation," one of them said. Her heart simply stopped. Khalid stared at them in disbelief, his mind struggling to process their words. She had been vibrant, full of life, just hours ago. How could she be gone? His gaze fell to the sapphire necklace, still clasped around her neck, its cursed beauty mocking him. The world around him blurred, the voices fading into a distant hum. All he could see was Layla, her lifeless form, and the necklace that had been his gift of love but now seemed to pulse with the weight of his greatest regret. He clutched her hand tightly, tears streaming down his face. "Layla," he whispered, "I'm so sorry." The mansion, once filled with life and laughter, now seemed to close in on itself, heavy with silence and sorrow. Khalid's heart, once a fortress of ambition, now felt like the hollow shell of a man who had lost everything. The mansion felt colder in the days following Layla's death, as if her warmth had been stripped from its walls. Khalid barely left their room, the memory of her stillness a constant torment. The sapphire necklace sat locked in a small box on his desk, a glimmer of cursed beauty that haunted him. The doctors had called it a natural death, but there was nothing natural about losing someone so vibrant, so full of life. He had done this. The necklace had done this. The memory of the jeweler's warning replayed in his mind like a cruel echo. Misfortune follows the wearer. Khalid had dismissed it as nonsense, and now Layla was gone. His staff tiptoed around the house, their whispers subdued. Friends and family sent condolences, but Khalid ignored them all. Calls from his company went unanswered. For the first time in years, Khalid al-Rahman had no interest in the empire he had built. His world had narrowed to one question: was the necklace truly cursed, and if so, how could he undo what it had done? The days turned into weeks, and Khalid's grief turned to obsession. He pored over the box that held the necklace, its weight unbearable yet impossible to discard. The legends surrounding the sapphire began to consume him. Late at night, he searched for anything that might give him answers. Ancient texts, obscure forums, even stories buried in folklore, anything to make sense of the inexplicable. It was during one of these sleepless nights that Khalid came across the name of Dr. Mariam Hassan, a renowned expert in Middle Eastern archaeology and folklore. Her work had delved into ancient curses and the myths tied to relics like the necklace. If anyone could help, it was her. He contacted her immediately, sending a personal jet to bring her to his home. When she arrived, Khalid met her with hollow eyes and a demeanor that barely resembled the man he once was. "Dr. Hassan, thank you for coming," he said, his voice heavy. "I need your help. My wife. She's gone, and it's because of this." He handed her the box containing the necklace. Miriam examined the sapphire carefully, her brow furrowing. "It's extraordinary," she said, "but there's something unsettling about it. You say your wife passed after wearing it? Khalid nodded, his hands clenching into fists. The jeweler warned me it was cursed. I thought it was just a story, but now I don't know what to believe. Miriam agreed to investigate its origins, though she warned him that the truth might not offer the closure he sought. Over the following days, she delved into ancient texts and archives, piecing together the necklace's history. Khalid barely slept, pacing the halls of his home as unease settled deeper into his chest. Strange things began to happen, things he couldn't explain. Late at night, he heard faint whispers echoing through the empty corridors, soft and unintelligible. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, even in the dim light. And then there were the visions. At first, they were fleeting, a glimpse of Layla's silhouette in the garden or her reflection in a mirror. But they grew more vivid. One night, as Khalid sat in his study, he saw her standing by the window, her face pale and her eyes filled with sorrow. She didn't speak, didn't move, but her presence filled the room like a haunting melody. Layla, he whispered, reaching for her, but the vision dissolved like mist. The staff began to notice the changes in the house as well. One by one, they reported hearing footsteps where no one walked, feeling chills in rooms that had always been warm. Rumors of the curse spread among them, and many quietly resigned, unable to endure the growing unease. Miriam worked tirelessly, finally uncovering a story buried in the sands of time. She called Khalid into her makeshift study one evening, her face grim. I've traced the necklace back to Queen Alma, as the jeweler told you, she began. She ruled a desert kingdom centuries ago, known for her beauty and wisdom. The sapphire was a gift from her lover, a man she trusted above all others. But he betrayed her, leading an uprising that cost her both her throne and her life. Legend says that with her dying breath, she cursed the sapphire, vowing that anyone who wore it would share her fate, betrayal, heartbreak, and eternal suffering. Khalid's stomach churned as Miriam continued. The curse doesn't just claim the wearer's life. It binds their soul, trapping them in a state of anguish until the truth of the betrayal is uncovered and justice is served. If Layla is bound by this curse, she hesitated, her voice softening. There may still be a way to free her. How? Khalid demanded, his voice cracking. What do I need to do? Miriam placed an ancient manuscript in front of him. The curse is tied to the origin of the sapphire. We need to uncover the full truth behind its creation and the betrayal of Queen Alma. Only then can Layla's soul be released. Khalid stared at the manuscript, its pages filled with intricate symbols and faded script. His grief now mingled with determination. If there was even a chance to save Layla, to give her peace, he would take it, no matter the cost. But as he stood, the whispers returned, louder this time, swirling around him like a storm. A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. And there, in the flickering light of the remaining lamp, Layla's face appeared again, her expression filled with both longing and pain. I will free you, Khalid whispered, his voice shaking. I swear it. The vision faded once more, leaving him standing in the dark, clutching the cursed necklace. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing with certainty. He would uncover the truth, even if it meant unraveling his own life in the process. Khalid gripped the sapphire necklace as if it were the only tangible connection to Layla he had left. The whispers, the visions, and Miriam's discoveries weighed heavily on him, but they also solidified his resolve. He couldn't let Layla's soul remain trapped. There was no turning back now. The journey began the next morning. Khalid and Miriam embarked on a whirlwind quest across the Middle East, following the faint, fragmented trail of Queen Alma and the cursed sapphire. Each step was guided by scraps of legend, ancient texts, and the reluctant cooperation of scholars and mystics who had spent their lives unraveling such mysteries. Their first stop was a secluded library in Cairo, hidden beneath an old mosque. The elderly caretaker reluctantly revealed scrolls that chronicled Alma's reign. The texts painted a vivid picture of a queen who had ruled with grace and strength, beloved by her people until the betrayal that ended her life. Khalid felt a pang of guilt as he read the details of Alma's death, a dagger plunged into her heart by the man she had loved most. The sapphire, forged from her tears, had been cursed with her dying breath. It wasn't just about her betrayal, Miriam explained, her voice steady as she studied the scrolls. It was about greed and selfishness. Her lover sought power at any cost, and in doing so, he bound her to an eternity of suffering. The sapphire became a symbol of that greed, a vessel for her anguish. Khalid listened in silence, the weight of her words sinking deep into his soul. He thought of the opulence surrounding his life, the unchecked ambition that had driven him to acquire everything, even at the cost of ignoring the warnings tied to the necklace. Was he so different from the man who betrayed Alima? Their journey continued, taking them to the ruins of Alima's palace in the heart of the Arabian desert. The structure was little more than crumbled stone, but among the ruins, they found a hidden chamber untouched by time. Inside, an inscription etched into the wall told the final part of the story. "The Queen's spirit cannot rest," Miriam translated, her voice echoing in the chamber. "She calls upon those who possess the sapphire to face her, to reckon with their own greed and offer restitution for her pain. Only then can the curse be lifted." Miriam turned to Khalid, her expression grave. "We're close, but there's more. You'll have to confront her spirit, and she will demand a sacrifice." Khalid nodded, determination blazing in his eyes. "If it means freeing Layla, I'll do whatever it takes." Their final destination was a forgotten temple deep in the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter. The journey there was treacherous, the scorching heat and shifting sands testing their resolve. When they finally arrived, the temple seemed otherworldly, its ancient walls carved with intricate symbols that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, as if the weight of centuries pressed down upon them. Miriam stayed behind at the entrance, her role complete. Khalid stepped forward, clutching the necklace in his hand, his heart pounding in his cheese. "You," she said, her voice like a desert wind, both soft and cutting. "Another who has ignored the warnings, consumed by his own desires. You are no different from the one who betrayed me." Khalid fell to his knees, the sapphire trembling in his hand. "I was blind," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I thought only of giving my wife something unique, something beautiful. I didn't understand the cost." Alima studied him, her gaze piercing. "And now you seek to free her? To undo what you have wrought?" "Yes," Khalid said, his voice firm despite the tears streaming down his face. "Take what you must. My life, my soul, anything to give Layla peace." Alima's expression softened, but only slightly. "It is not your life I seek. It is the greed that binds your heart. You live in excess while others suffer. Your wealth is a symbol of the same selfishness that led to my betrayal. If you would free her, you must surrender it all." Khalid hesitated, the weight of her demand crashing over him. His wealth was not just money, it was power, security, and the foundation of his empire. But then he thought of Layla, her laughter, her compassion, and the ways she had always used their resources to help others. He realized then that she had been the best part of him, the one who had always seen beyond the glittering facade. "I will do it," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll give it all away. It's a small price to pay for her freedom." Alima raised her hand, and the sapphire glowed with an otherworldly light. The chamber filled with the howling wind as the necklace disintegrated into a fine mist, which swirled around Khalid before dissipating into the air. "It is done," Alima said, her form beginning to fade. "Your wife's soul is free. But remember, wealth is a burden if not wielded with wisdom. Do not make the same mistakes again." As her spirit vanished, the temple fell silent, and Khalid felt an overwhelming sense of relief. He made his way back to Miriam, who looked at him with a mixture of concern and hope. "Did it work?" she asked. Khalid nodded, the tears in his eyes now ones of gratitude. "She's free." When they returned home, Khalid wasted no time. He announced his plan to divest himself of his fortune, donating the majority of it to causes that Layla had championed. Hospitals, schools, and orphanages bore her name, ensuring her legacy lived on. One night, as Khalid sat in their garden, the air felt lighter, as if the house had been cleansed of its sorrow. A soft breeze brushed against his face, and he turned, his heart leaping as he saw Layla's spirit standing before him. She was radiant, her expression filled with love and peace. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying on the wind. Before he could respond, she faded into the night, leaving Khalid with a sense of closure he hadn't thought possible. He closed his eyes, a bittersweet smile on his lips. From that day forward, Khalid dedicated his life to Layla's memory, finding solace in the good he could do in her name. The curse had been broken, and though he would always miss her, he knew her spirit was finally at rest. In freeing her, he had also freed himself. Khalid's life, once defined by luxury and ambition, became a quiet but purposeful existence. The mansion was sold, its opulence replaced by a modest villa near the edge of the desert, where he could feel closer to the simplicity Layla had always cherished. His days were spent overseeing the foundations he had created in her name, ensuring that the wealth he once hoarded now served those in need. But peace, as fleeting as it often is, was interrupted by whispers that the sapphire curse had not been fully laid to rest. It began subtly, with reports from the charitable organizations that received Khalid's donations. Hospitals noted equipment mysteriously failing. Schools found their newly built walls cracking overnight. The orphanages named after Layla experienced a chilling unease, with children waking in the night, terrified by shadows they couldn't explain. At first, Khalid dismissed these occurrences as coincidence, but Miriam soon came to him with troubling news. "The curse may have been broken for Layla," she said, her voice weighted with concern. "But the sapphire's destruction doesn't erase the grief and pain tied to its origins. Queen Alma's anguish still lingers. It's as if the energy of the curse has dispersed, untethered but still active." Khalid felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had sacrificed his wealth and freed Layla's spirit, but if the curse's malevolence persisted, it could undo everything he had worked to restore. "There must be a way to finish this," Khalid said. "A way to cleanse what remains." Miriam's research led them to a new discovery, an ancient ritual tied to the Queen's story. It was said that Alma's spirit could only find eternal peace if her betrayal was avenged and her legacy reclaimed. The final act of penance required Khalid to confront the Queen's essence one last time and fulfill the justice she had been denied in life. The ritual required two key elements: an artifact from Alma's reign and a descendant of the man who betrayed her. The first was located in a private collection in Riyadh, an ornate dagger said to have belonged to the Queen. Khalid purchased it with the last of his personal savings, its ornate hilt gleaming with the same craftsmanship as the sapphire necklace. The second element was far more complicated. Miriam's research revealed that the man who betrayed Alma had descendants scattered across the region, but one family line still resided in the kingdom that had once been hers. With painstaking effort, they tracked down a man named Tariq, an unassuming schoolteacher who had no knowledge of his cursed lineage. When Khalid approached Tariq, the man was understandably skeptical, but as Miriam laid out the evidence, documents, artifacts, and historical connections, he agreed to participate. He, too, felt a sense of obligation, even if the weight of the curse was new to him. The three of them journeyed back to the ruins of Alma's palace under the light of a full moon. The dagger gleamed in Khalid's hand as they prepared the ritual, etching ancient symbols into the sand and placing offerings meant to honor the Queen's spirit. The air grew heavy as the ritual began, and Khalid felt the same supernatural chill he had experienced in the temple. Alma's spirit appeared once more, her form luminous but flickering as if torn between worlds. Her gaze fell on Tariq, and her expression hardened. "You carry the blood of the one who betrayed me," she said, her voice echoing through the ruins. "Do you come to atone for his sins?" Tariq stepped forward, trembling but resolute. "I do. I know I cannot undo what was done, but I offer my sincerity and my life, if necessary." Alma turned to Khalid, her eyes softer but still piercing. "And you, Khalid al-Rahman? You have freed your wife, but why do you remain?" Khalid bowed his head, his voice steady. "Because I cannot leave this unfinished. Your pain deserves resolution, and your legacy deserves honor. I am here to right the wrongs of the past, no matter the cost. For a long moment, Alma said nothing. Then she gestured to the dagger in Khalid's hand. To reclaim my legacy, the blade must be returned to my resting place. The blood of my betrayer's line must seal the vow that no such betrayal will happen again. But it need not take life. A drop of blood, willingly given, is enough. Tariq nodded, stepping closer. Khalid held the dagger out, and Tariq pricked his finger, letting a single drop fall onto the sand. The ground trembled as the blood soaked in, and the dagger glowed faintly before fading back to its original state. A sudden gust of warm wind swept through the ruins, carrying with it a sense of release. Alma's form began to shimmer, her expression softening into one of peace. "It is done," she said, her voice now a whisper. "The curse is no more. Thank you, Khalid al-Rahman, for your courage. Thank you, Tariq, for your sacrifice." As her form dissolved into the night, the ruins seemed to come alive, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Khalid felt an overwhelming sense of calm, as if centuries of anguish had finally been lifted from the land. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences tied to Khalid's charitable work ceased. The hospitals thrived, the schools flourished, and the orphanages became places of joy. Khalid's legacy, like Layla's, was now one of healing and hope. Though his wealth was gone, Khalid found himself at peace. The emptiness he had felt after Layla's death was filled not by material things but by the lives he had touched and the redemption he had earned. As he walked through the desert one evening, the stars glittering above, he thought of Layla and Alma, their spirits finally at rest. Their stories, though born of pain, had found their resolution. And so had he.